The following is a production of Sharkflight Media.
From mechs to mages or agents to Argonauts, this is the world of Chris Kennedy Publishing. This is the CKP Future Books Podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to the July episode of Future Books. If you're a long-term listener, we certainly appreciate your monthly listening to our rants on the CKP universe. And if you're new, this podcast is about science fiction, about Chris Kennedy Publishing, and about the Four Horsemen universe. So if you're into any of those things, you have found a home. This month, we're once again joined by our publisher and editor, Chris Kennedy. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Randy, thanks a lot for having me. Always great to be here.
Well, I know that it was tough coming and having time to do this because you just got back from LibertyCon.
Sure did. Got back yesterday.
Well, at the end of the podcast, we're going to talk some about LibertyCon in general and about this year's LibertyCon. But the month of July is jam-packed with four of my favorite authors. This month is going to be an outstanding month for Chris Kennedy Publishing.
Oh, absolutely. There's all sorts of great stuff coming.
So we're going to start off the month on July 5th with Three-Player Game by John Siers. This is a continuation of his Lunar Free State series. It's for people who are not familiar or haven't read any of John Siers' books. Imagine if Robert Heinlein was still alive and he was writing a series of science fiction books but had our modern technology wrapped up in it. And in Three-Player Game, we get to see yet another group of Earthlings getting together and pooling their resources to become competitive in the space industry. And I've read this book. It is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it is. It's neat to see, some of the other countries, the non-aligned countries getting into the game. They've kind of been on the sidelines to this point, and you had to know they were going to get involved at some point because everybody has their own best interests at heart, and their interests weren't getting serviced up till now. So the question is, though, how is that going to impact what everyone else does? As they start to have an impact.
When I was reading the book, I was very excited because when you go from a two-person game, to use John's analogy, one side's black, one side's white, and you choose, which side you're going to pull for. But by
pick your poison.
Pick your poison. But now we've got three legitimate players in this universe who are, all from Earth. And so now we have shades of gray. We have their forward-facing face, the face that they show the world. And then we're also getting to see some of the behind-the-scenes maneuvering that they don't necessarily want the other two parties to see. So this has brought a brand new, fresh appeal to the Lunar Free State universe.
Absolutely. It's not that, they're coming in on one side or the other. They're coming in on their own side. And that puts a little bit of wrench into everybody's planning. The Confeds have been primarily focused with bringing down the Lunar Free State, but now they have someone else that probably aligns a little closer to the Lunar Free State than to them. So how's that gonna impact what they plan to do? As they move forward.
So if you're a fan of the Lunar Free State, or if you want to start and read a series that is absolutely outstanding, I would strongly encourage, that would be a great 4th of July read for people who are on vacation. Three-Player Game by John Siers.
It's number 10.
Number 10.
Number 10. It's the 11th book in the Lunar Free State universe because there's Aphrodite of Luna, which is a related book, but it is the 10th book in the main storyline.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Then on July 12th, we have our featured book. This is an anthology, Bureau 42, Imagine Cold Case Files in Space with mech armor. This is a tremendously good book. We are back in the Peacemaker universe, and tell us a little bit about this anthology.
Sure. This is in the Four Horsemen universe, and it is in the Peacemaker line. And Kevin, so not surprisingly, Kevin Ikenberry is running this one along with Mia Kleve, who people that have read it will recognize the planet of Cleve. And
I got a little smile on my face. That was the first time I had noticed that, was when I read this anthology.
Yep, and it's been in all of the Peacemaker books, I think. So now you see where the the influences come from. So it's a great anthology in that it has a number of really strong stories. It also sets up the next little bit of the Peacemaker storyline, which as I mentioned at LibertyCon this year, here over the past weekend, we are working to bring the Four Horsemen storyline to a close. Not to close the universe, but to, there's several things that the readers have been hanging around waiting to see how, different things get resolved. You got the Carmine, you got the Duzman, you got the SIs, and all of those need to be dealt with. And, we greatly appreciate all of the readers that have hung around for the 94 books that we currently have out. Bureau 42 will be number 95 in the universe.
Is it hard to wrap your head around that in 5 years, 95 books, and
I think Cartwright's came out in 17, so it's been just a little bit longer than that. I think it came out in December of 17, so it's been, I guess, 6.5.
Yeah. So for this whole universe to have exploded like that, and then built a publishing company on top of it.
Yeah. Never really expected it would get as big as it has. We knew we wanted to build it up. I don't think that we ever really thought, 120 books. Yeah, that'd be about right. But that's probably where we'll end up by the time we finish the Phoenix Initiative series, and then the final series will be named Exodus.
Oh, okay.
We're looking forward to getting to that. We'll probably be making the change from one to the other in 2025, and then bringing that storyline to a close. People get all worried that's the end. That's not the end. There will still be lots of other things, but like I said, we owe the readers some conclusion on a couple different things.
If you're like me, you want a payoff,
right? And yeah, we need to provide the payoff and then move on to the next thing. And we've got a number of things planned in the universe, and there's plenty of things that can be done still, and we're looking forward to doing them. But we want to make good on our promise, to provide a storyline, which ultimately needs some sort of resolution.
Well, this is one of my favorite anthologies that we've done. There's not a bad story in there. Kudos to Nick Stevenson for his short story. I think it may be the best thing he's written that I've read. It's not easy to read, but it's a great story. We get to see some characters that we've seen in other anthologies and other stories that I have missed. The one that's kind of like a armadillo, ground living, lives for a very long time. That particular
Balin. I forget the name of the species. The species, but Balin, people will remember Balin, which
love
is
his stories.
Maurice's character. He was in one of the other anthologies, and he was in World Enders that Marisa and I wrote. Along with the Sal Shaw Peacemaker and and they were running around together.
Yeah, one of my favorite characters ever. I was so happy to see him back. So this is a great anthology. I think anthologies, short stories in general, are harder to write than novels because it's got to be as good as a novel, but you're so constrained by space to be able to tell a full story, and every one of these tell a full story. So that's July 12th, Bureau 42.
Woohoo!
So on July 14th, we have a book by Fred Hughes, one of our favorite authors. He has been writing the Prince Hazard series. Every one of these books are exciting. They're action adventure, they're science fiction, they're space battles. I can't say enough good things about Fred. His books are extremely easy to read and tell great stories, and his book is coming out on July 19th. What's happening in Hazard's world?
The book is Prince IMPERATOR. Golly, I can never pronounce this right. I want to pronounce it like I would in Latin. IMPERATOR, Imperator. I don't know. Prince Imperator.
Yeah. Or if you live in South Carolina and are a redneck, it's Prince Imperator.
Okay, Prince Imperator. Let's go with that. I can say it. Prince Imperator. And that's not to make fun of the book itself, because the book itself is great. And everybody that has been following the Prince of Brittania series is going to want to pick this up. This is the final book in Hazard's story.
Oh no!
Oh yes. So this is going to bring Hazard's story to a close. But just like we said with the Four Horsemen universe, there is more coming after that. He has already begun work on the next book, which I believe the series is Scions of Empire. So that's going to be coming, and it will take up, where this ends, and it will be as good or better.
Well, Fred left us with a lot of unanswered questions at the end of the last book, so I have been anxiously awaiting this.
He did, and he jumps right in right from where he left off. So you'll find out what's going on right as soon as you begin, and off you go from there. This one, just like the rest of them, full of like you said, full of action, and jump in, hang on, and off you go.
And then we're going to end up the month on the 25th. No, I'm sorry, the 26th with Remnants of Empire. This is another anthology in the Ashes of Entecea series, and Kacey Ezell took lead on this one.
Yeah, she absolutely did. And, the Ashes of Entecea series, the universe is her brainchild. To this point, we have 3 books in it. The Queen's Fixer, which was by Kacey, and then King's Daughter and Conqueror's Promise, which were books that I joined her to co-write. That ended that little arc, and this is an anthology in that universe that is going to help expand the Empire just a little bit, expand the universe. And I know for sure that there are a number of threads that are going to turn into, new storylines. We've already spoken with several of the authors that are in this anthology, and they're looking forward to writing, in some cases, a standalone, the longer story, and in others, they've got trilogies lined up, which is something that CKP seems to do. Hey, great story, bud. You owe me a trilogy.
And for our listeners, this is a great universe, a great series of books to get started on for Chris Kennedy Publishing. There's only 4 plus the anthology, 3 plus the anthology.
Yeah, 3 plus the anthology.
So you don't have to get, you don't have to have a mountain of 100 books ahead of you. And this is a little outside of the norm for a lot of the books that CKP does. It's more epic science fiction. Think Foundation, think Dune, think, the 1950s epic science fiction stories that we grew up from the golden age of science fiction.
Absolutely. This is more space opera than it is, straight sci-fi. And I think that the covers will definitely give you that kind of feel. It's definitely the covers are definitely retro, which is exactly what we were looking for. And I couldn't be any prouder of the work that I personally have done in this series and, working with Kacey Ezell. It's, one of my favorite series.
Yeah, I'm going to punish you by making you work with Kacey Ezell, and if you don't get better, I'm going to put Melissa Althoff with you too.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot worse things to have to do than be writing with those two ladies.
Yeah,
so.
please don't throw me in that briar patch.
Yeah, I'm currently standing by, ready to do it anytime they're ready to go.
Yeah, two of the best new authors for Chris Kennedy. Kacey, I guess we can't say new authors. I mean, she's been around for a long time, but man, Kacey, Melissa, Casey Moores, all of them are just outstanding writers, and I'd read anything that they wrote. So really excited about this anthology. Yeah.
I have a story in it as well, and that is going to open up a new thread. And I'm not gonna spoil it, but when you read it, you'll definitely see where it's going, and looking forward to getting some more in on that. So I'm committed to writing probably another trilogy, probably with Kacey, as soon as we can get together on it.
So that's 4 books in the month of July. This should give everybody plenty of stuff to read on their vacations. 3-player game, Bureau 42. From the South, Prince Imperator.
Thank you for not making me say that again.
Or Prince Imperator. Close, maybe. And then Remnants of Empire. So you can't go wrong in the month of July. You should buy all of them. I'm personally looking forward to every single one of these books, and I think you should too. Before we go, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast, you just got back from LibertyCon, and I think this was a particularly important LibertyCon for you. Can you give us a little after-action report and tell us what's going on and what was seen, said, and done in Chattanooga, Tennessee?
Sure. Well, it's for those that haven't been to LibertyCon. LibertyCon is a special kind of convention. It has been likened to a family reunion with people you like. And it was great to see, we probably had 15 or so CKP authors there. There were a bunch of folks in addition that, don't have stories but have short stories. Got to see some people that I'd never met before, so that was a lot of fun. We discussed number of universes and panels. The fallen world. I know there was a salvage title universe panel that I wasn't on the panel for it, and I had something else at the same time. But basically all of our big shared universes had something. The Four Horsemen one was the last day, in the afternoon, and we had a great time with that. I think we had 8 or 10 folks sitting up on the, up at the front of the room, and just the readers could see how we get along as a group, with everyone making fun of everyone else. And it was a lot of fun. Had a neat thing happen last year when I was there. I was talking to this nice lady in the bar, Nita Lastinger, and she had heard the Four Horsemen universe, and I told her she needed to give it a try. And she was there again this year, and she came up to me and she said, "Okay, you're right. The Four Horsemen universe is really good. I've read it." And I'm like, "What do you mean you've read it? You've read all 94 books?" And she said, "Oh yeah. And then I read, John Osborne's Milesian Accords, and, I read, The Ashes of Entecea, a few other things by the authors that are in there." I'm like, "How many books do you read?" And, last year she read 183. So, She's finishing about one every other day.
Yep.
So people that say, oh, no, there's too many books in the Four Horsemen universe, I'll never get caught up. Well, apparently you just have to want it.
That's exactly right. And LibertyCon, for people who've never been to a convention, everybody hears about DragonCon, and don't get me wrong, DragonCon is fantastic. And if you want to do it, experience it, or be involved, there is something for everybody at DragonCon somewhere. You may have to hunt to find it, but it's there.
Without a doubt.
But if you want to go to a real science fiction convention it pushes authors, it pushes good books, it pushes a collegial atmosphere where you can actually sit down with somebody and have a conversation. Even though it is one of the harder conventions to get tickets for, it is by far, in my opinion, the convention in the South to go to.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The getting a ticket is hard, but it is well worth it. You get a chance to, hang out with all of your favorite authors. It's kind of the Bain home convention, I think, in that, a lot of their authors live either in the area or close by, and they all come. So you're seeing those folks.
If you like playing spades, you can always find a card game somewhere.
Yes, I believe Sharon Weber won the spades tournament this year, beating out David. So I know he was, lamenting.
Well, that's because he's going to hear it for the next year.
Oh, I'm sure. Without a doubt.
So, LibertyCon, no affiliation. They don't pay us a thing to say this, but if you're new to science fiction, if you've ever wanted to go to a science fiction convention, if you can get a ticket, that in my opinion is the best bang for your buck that you can do going to a science fiction convention anywhere on the East Coast.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, that wraps up the month of July. We've got 4 books. So I guess Chris decided that he was through idling and not doing anything like he did last month and only doing 3. So they're all great. We went to LibertyCon, and next month we're coming back with 4 more books. Chris, thank you for joining us, and look forward to doing this again next month.
You bet. Can't wait.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to the first half of the podcast. And this month, we have a very special guest on Future Books, Mia Kleve. Mia is one of the editors with Chris Kennedy Publishing. She has done a fabulous job over the years, and we have a new anthology coming out this month, Bureau 42, and Mia was the editor of this anthology. So we're going to talk about the book, and we're also going to try to get some inside baseball information from Mia on editing, and also maybe some tips and tricks for if you are writing books, what an editor wants to see, what makes their life easier, because if you make editors and publishers' life easy, you have a much better chance of getting your book or your short story published. Welcome, Mia.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we are very excited to have you. So let's start a little bit with who Mia is and what does an editor do?
Okay. So my name is Mia Kleve. I have a freelance editing business. I actually started about 10 years ago. Working with Kevin J. Anderson. Yes, talk about name dropping.
I was going to say you didn't start at the bottom, did you?
Well, I mean, I did kind of start at the bottom because I started as a fan, and what got me into it was I have been a reader for my entire life, as far back as I can remember. And when ebooks, electronic books, started coming out, I started noticing it's like, wow, these are, there's errors that are still in them, and there are problems with them. And I noticed this back in print books, but I mean, there's nothing you could do about print books because
they were already done.
But exactly. But working in IT, which is what I've done for most of my professional career, was it's like, it's electronic. You can fix this before you put it out there. Doesn't anybody bother doing this? And I got chatting with somebody on Twitter way back at the beginning. And he's like, yeah, all these publishers, they've got these huge backlists. I don't understand why these books aren't being put out. And I go see Kevin Anderson at a book signing, and we're chatting, and I friend him on Facebook. And then one day he's like, hey, so I run a publishing company, and we're working to get Frank Herbert's out-of-print books back out into the public. And one of the things that we want to do is, or one of the things we have to do is we have to scan everything in the computer, and then we need to have people go through it and make sure that everything came through as actual words. Because one of the problems with optical character recognition, or OCR, programs was they weren't very good. And the other part is paperbacks for the longest time. I mean, we're pretty lucky now. Paper quality right now is really good. So the reason books were called pulps is because they were printed on
the crappiest paper they could get.
Precisely, because it was cheap. And so when you're scanning these in, you've got characters that don't come through because the paper was rough, the ink didn't get 100% onto the page. So he was asking for volunteers to go through and make these corrections. Well, along the way, because I'm one of those folks that if I can save time, I will save time. So I started writing down, okay, these are the things that I need to look for. These are the things I need to fix. These are the things. This is how I can do a global find and replace, as opposed to looking for each and every instance of it. So I can get kind of a jump on what I'm doing, and then I can clean up a manuscript and then go through what I call brute force method, which is basically you read it from cover to cover.
Isn't global find and replace great?
Oh, it is, and it isn't, and I'll explain something later. So, anyways, I worked with Kevin on that as just as a volunteer, and then of course people change jobs, people's situations change, and eventually I ended up in charge of all of the volunteers. So that's something that I continue to do. But along the way, I got asked if I wanted to start looking at new manuscripts that were coming into Kevin and Wordfire Press Publishing. So it was, so I did, and then I was like, oh wow, this is really fun. And slowly but surely, I started doing more and more. I started out as Kevin Ikenberry, also a familiar name for CKP readers. I started out as one of his first readers, or alpha readers. Yep. So what happened is he writes the book, and then he throws it over the fence to me and a couple other folks, and we tell him whether the story holds together, whether there's something that didn't quite make sense.
Is there a plot hole? Is a book that he wrote in the past? Is this absolutely not following canon?
Exactly. Yeah, stuff like that. Depending on what it is, because I'm also actually working on a new series of his. But so yeah, canon if it's in a larger universe like the Four Horsemen and things like that. And so that got me experience there, and then just over the years. And that's how actually I came to Chris Kennedy Publishing. Was he had me do Peacemaker, read through Peacemaker, do that. Read through the short stories, everything like that, and slowly but surely. And then I got onto Chris's ARC reader group. And then after about a half dozen of those, I was like, hey, Chris, you want to hire me as an editor? And because Four Horsemen and everything else was just going gangbusters at that point, he was like, sure. And so here we are.
It always amazed me also as I got to know more and more authors over the years. Now, there are exceptions to this, but for the most part, your best storytellers are usually the people who have the worst grammar.
Yes and no. Okay, so Chris Kennedy himself is an exception.
He is.
Because he used to be a teacher.
Right.
Because he used to be a teacher. Kevin Ikenberry is an exception because he worked with folks like Kevin J. Anderson when he was starting out. Part of it is twofold. So, number one is the story is so good. People are, editors and publishers are willing to work with the author to make it as good as possible. And dealt with a couple of people like that. The other part of it is sometimes, you know, you can work with somebody and it just doesn't work. And they, with the indie author movement,
right?
I suppose you could call it, over the last 10, 15 years, it's a lot easier to get books out there because you don't have to worry about whether or not a publisher likes it and whether or not they're willing to work with an author to get it perfectly polished. So you don't have to worry about that as much. Now, as an editor, and I always recommend if you are starting out or fairly new in your author career, I recommend hiring an editor. If you have been doing writing for a while, if you are good at self-editing, you may not need to hire an editor. So, people are like, well, I know probably 5 authors personally who they don't send it past maybe a final read through just to make sure there isn't a stray typo or something. Mm-hmm. But they don't go through the same levels of editing as some other authors do. But it really depends on the author, because there are some people that are like, I refuse to have anybody else look at it. My book is perfect. I don't need anything corrected. That could be debated either way.
I thought that was called an unpublished author.
Not nowadays.
Well, that's true. If you got an Amazon account, you can publish anything you want to.
Absolutely. So, but if you're really looking for a readership and you're really looking to get the best story out there as possible, then yes, you should hire an editor. And there are different levels of it. So first off is a developmental editor, which is basically you'll send a manuscript to the editor, and then they read through it, and then they will tell you everything that's broken. And they will give you suggestions on how to fix it, and they will maybe give you ways to increase action in certain places, maybe pause it so that it's not building quite as fast, make sure that your characters are consistent, make sure that your characters aren't all the same, make sure that the characters are acting within characters. So if you set something up at the beginning of the story where a character, your heroic character, you can't have your heroic character do something abominable later on in the story because it's out of character. So they may say, okay, well, this action that you have happen here, he could be adjacent to it, but he can't actually do it, type of thing. So that's developing the story, hence developmental editing.
Yeah. And I
next is
one of my biggest pet peeves. It doesn't happen as often in science fiction as it does in mystery fiction. But for an author to write a complete story that I'm absolutely in love with, and then come to the big reveal of, who done it or what happened or whatever, and he gave you all these clues so that you could be putting it together in your head, and then he pulls something out of a hat that there's no way you could have figured it out. That drives me insane.
Yes, and that's a problem. And they're like, well, no. If it's somebody who's still alive, they may be like, well, no, this is where you should have realized that it wasn't going to be that. And it's like, no, that is not good. Just because that's what you wanted the ending to be does not mean that's what you set up. Because if that's what you wanted, that's what you should have set up. Yes, in mysteries, that's one of those things. The other two or three, no, you're fine. The other two or three types of editing is line editing and copy editing. And in the freelance world, I'm finding out from other editors and from other people, those two kind of go hand in hand now, just because a lot of people don't have the funds to hire for all the different levels.
Right.
So they're looking to kind of combine some of the stuff together, and line and copy editing really can go together. So what line editing is everything happening in the right order. Do some of the paragraphs make sense if you juggle this around? Paragraphs, you learned in English class. This is how you should structure your sentences. This is how you should structure your paragraphs. This is how you should structure an essay, because we don't get to do much fiction in high school English. But it kind of goes, it still kind of flows where everything has to flow together. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be repeating something. You don't want to be saying the same thing 3 different ways, because this isn't an essay. So,
don't use the same word in 9 consecutive sentences.
Right. So that's line editing, but it's also a little copy editing. That's one of those things that is kind of a borderline. But line editing is making sure that you're not repeating the same thing. And if you are, can those 3 sentences be combined, or do 2 of them just need to go away? Do these paragraphs need to go together, or do they need to be broken up? So line editing has a lot to do with the flow of the story. And then copy editing is making sure you've got the right words, making sure you don't, more of the obvious typos. Homonyms are terrible. I mean, I have a list. I was collecting a list of homonyms for a class I was getting. And man, there were at least 100 words where there's a homonym that people get mixed up. The other thing is typos. So I would say it's probably 75 words and 25 typos that you just want to watch out for, because if you get the wrong word in the wrong place because of a typo, it can be really awkward. You know?
Not to interrupt again, but I'm going to interrupt.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I do for CKP occasionally is I read slush submissions. And so Chris had sent me this story, and I read it, and I loved the story. It was kind of Arthur. It was fantasy. It was kind of like from the Arthurian mythos. And I get to the end, or near the end, almost to the end, and I'm reading right along, and this character had been doing stuff all throughout the book, and all of a sudden I get to a page, and I read it, and I know that's the character that I've been reading through the book, but he's got a completely different name. And so I go back and I start reading to make sure maybe my ADHD caused me to miss something. And I go back and I read through it. I get to that part and I'm like, that's not his name. And so I finished the book. It was a great book. And I sent Chris what I thought about it and everything. I said, but would you please ask the author on page so-and-so, paragraph here, this name, should it not be this name? And the name that the author had called this person was a name that was also used in the book earlier. And come to find out, the author, the original hero name, was the name that I called as a mistake. And halfway through the book, he decided that wasn't a good name for a hero, so he threw it on to somebody else in the book. And he didn't make the change. He made the change all the way through the book except for that one time. And I say that to say this. Like, you're in your Y-O-U-R and then Y-O-U''RE. It seems like a little thing. And I'm sure that when somebody's writing a book, they're like, that's not going to bother them if I miss it or whatever. Or, they just don't notice it. But I'm playing a movie in my head when I'm reading a book. And when I hit something like that, or hit something like the name is wrong or something like that, it stops my suspension of disbelief. And it brings me out of my movie. And it's like a bad commercial. So copy editing is super important.
It is, yes. And hopefully that actually gets caught way back in the developmental edit stage.
Right.
However, if the name doesn't change until later, then they hopefully send it through another run, like a copy edit or even a proof edit, because that's when I've had people go, well, if you're doing a proof edit and you see a major error, I'm like, I may not fix it, but I will definitely highlight it and let my client know, hey, this isn't working here. Because, I mean, I would hate to be the editor. Well, why did you let this go through? It's like, well, that wasn't part of my job. It's like, I can't do that. But, I mean, there are some people who can do that, but I'm not that kind of editor. I have to point out the error and say, hey, you need to look at this because this doesn't quite work. If you want to talk it over, we can, but technically this is not part of the copy edit or whatever level of editing I'm being hired to do. That brings up a good point about global find and replace. So, well, because name changes are one of those situations that, oh, well, it's not going to be Fred, it's now going to be George. And you figure the easiest thing to do is to do a global find and replace.
Right.
But What if but if you only put in change Fred to George, global find and replace all, you don't go through and review each and every one of them. And Word has specific checkboxes that you can check. One of them is case only, match case, sorry. And then the other one is whole world word only, which is a little harder because if it's Fred's or George's or what, you'll miss some of those. So match case is the important one because you want anytime you've capitalized Fred. Otherwise, you're going to have words like offered. It's going to be of George.
Right.
Type of thing. And my favorite error is now a Facebook meme. It was an American book being re-edited to be released in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And they were changing pants to trousers. And whoever was in charge of this part of the process just did a global find and replace on pants to trousers.
Oh, Lord.
So imagine somebody's surprised when they come across Ocu trousers.
That's hilarious.
So that's my favorite example.
The
of
law of
that.
unintended consequences.
Absolutely. And yeah, so you have to be really careful when you're using global find and replace because there are definitely situations where you don't want that to be an error that you introduce into your own work, especially if somebody has already done the editing on it and nobody else's eyes are going to be on it. So if worse comes to worse, don't do global find and replace all. Go through each and every instance and go, oh, I'm glad I did it this way.
Yeah, see it in
there's
context.
Going to be one. Yeah, there's going to be at least one where you're like, oh, that would have been bad.
Yeah. While we're talking about this, one of the things that I want to point out to our listeners, you may have been around CKP even earlier than I was, but even in my time, I have watched CKP grow and become more professional as the company grew, as more authors came in, and the two areas I think that are most customer facing. The big one, of course, is the changing covers over the last 3 years. The covers have become much more commercial, much more what you would expect in a bookstore, rather than the traditional indie paperback on Amazon, which has clip art or line art trying to be a cover.
Right.
And then the second is the use of you, and I'm sure there probably are others, to make sure that the product, even if the story is fantastic, without any editing whatsoever, that the product is professional and is laid out well and is a real book. It's not just a manuscript, a Word document that has been run through an EPUB device and then outputted and loaded up to Amazon.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I know of at least 3 other folks who are either editors or proofers, final run through on some of this stuff. And Chris keeps us busy.
Well, it's important. Pulp fiction was unknown before it came out. And I liken what we're in now, especially with ebooks, to that 1940s era where pulp fiction became a really big deal. The publishing industry had about priced itself out of the market. If you were going to spend the amount of money, especially for a hardback book, a lot of people would just rather spend that money on a DVD or a movie. And with ebooks, now you can make a minimal investment that, and I think the same thing during the pulp fiction years, you can make a minimal investment that if you get something and it's not particularly your cup of tea, you don't feel obligated to finish it. You don't feel like that I'm never going to do that again. You just go find another ebook, and it's less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks in most cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And for somebody like me, because I've been a huge reader, and I love to own my books. I have nothing against libraries. if I want to go back and read a book, I want to be able to just grab it off my shelf and go.
And also, I'm the type of person that when I read one that just absolutely knocks me out of the park, if it's not an ebook, I go and I buy 3 or 4 extra copies because I'm going to lend it out to other people. And I learned years ago that you don't lend out your book that you want back.
Right? Right? Exactly. I stopped lending when I stopped getting. It's like, people, no, you do not get to keep my book. So, or you lend it to somebody and then it ends up in their trunk, and you're just like,
or they give it back to you dog-eared, or your slip cover has been ripped in the back. Oh, yes, that drives me nuts. Yes. Or there's a ring of water right in the center of your slip cover.
I had a first edition of a book, and I lent it to somebody, and I got it back with food stains in it. I was just like, oh my God.
Well, I had a galley proof of Snow Crash, and I lent it to a friend of mine, and it came back, and he had destroyed the spine. And that was the last time I lent out a book that had real meaning and value to me. Yeah. It's like, I would much rather buy you a brand new copy
Absolutely. And people are like, when do I need to get this back? No, that's your copy. You can have that.
Yeah.
There you go.
Someday in the future, when you read a book that just absolutely knocks your socks off and you think it suits me, buy me a copy, and we're even.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just being able to buy all the books. I mean, now I get to write them off too because,
it's a business expense.
It is a business. Why did you buy that? Because I have to keep up with the universe because I added the other books in the universe.
That's exactly right.
And, but I love being able to own, but I have books that I haven't read because I love the cover or I intended to read it at the time. And now I'm just like, no, I probably won't read it. But you should see my office. I've got stacked all the time.
I'm going to trump you. I have a full Virginia edition of the Heinlein collection. And
yes, nice.
Then I have the entire Heinlein collection in books that I've picked up at bookstores because I don't want to break the spines of the Virginia edition.
Nice. No, I can one better than you. No. I have a signed copy of The Green Hills of Earth.
Oh wow! Yep, you got me there.
The only one that would be better is if I could find a signed copy of The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, because that's my favorite.
That was my very first science fiction book I ever read.
Yeah, that is my favorite ever, and I still read that every couple of years. And honestly, that was one of the reasons. Heinlein was one of the reasons why the 4-HU was so cool to me, is because Starship Troopers, of course, and now you've got. They're not exactly the same type of mechs, but you've got, battle bots, basically, in the 4-HU. And it's like, okay, yeah, I can get behind this.
Well, Cartwright's Cavaliers read like a Heinlein novel.
Yeah.
I mean, it does. Exactly. It was almost like if somebody had taken and updated the technology and let Robert Heinlein write a young adult novel. I love Cartwright's Cavaliers.
Yeah.
And John Siers writes very much like Heinlein, I think, in his Lunar Free State books.
Yeah. I think you're right. The other one that so he's probably a little bit more up to the Starship Troopers level is Bill Frisbee's Last Marines.
Yes. When what got me started working with Chris and wanting to meet him and do something to help the CKP universe, our publishing, grow was I picked up Cartwright's Cavaliers on like a 99-cent sale and read it because I couldn't find anything that I wanted to read right that minute, and I read the little blurb. And it was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then I sat there and I read everything they'd published to that point over a period of about a month. And, of course, that wasn't quite the task that it would be today.
Right.
But I immediately this is somebody who really gets ebooks. It's more than just publishing books. It's doing marketing. It's having a quality product, not just taking people on because they've written something and you're going to put it up there and throw it against the wall. There was actual quality control in the product. And as I've said on the podcast before and have said to Chris to his face, I love the fact that CKP has a no butthole policy. Everybody that works and is associated with CKP that I have met has been a quality person that you enjoy working with or having a relationship with.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's so much fun. And I've been working on the Bill Fawcett's new series.
Which is so good.
Right. Well, I didn't get book one because of my schedule.
Right.
But I've been working on the rest of it. And oh my God, so I was joking with Kacey.
Right.
I was like, dude, you're supposed to be writing fiction, not current events.
Almost, yes. And this, I tell people, this is almost, this series here is like Michael Crichton and current events. It is so good. I mean, everything in that series, all of the hand wavium. There's no hand wavium. The technology is there. Somebody just has to put it together. The hardest thing is the power supply.
Yes, I saw Bill Fawcett talking on another podcast, and he said if they could figure out a power supply, a battery, they could do those. They could do those suits in that series.
And isn't it so cool that Bill wrote the first book and then wanted someone like Kacey to work in the universe and eventually take it over? And because if there's very few people in the science fiction community of that generation who interacted and worked with the number of science fiction gods that are still alive. And for him to write a product like this that is so current and cutting edge, and then to have the grace to say, here, I've started you out. Here's something you can work with. That's amazing to me.
Yeah. And Bill's one of those guys. I think Mike Resnick would fall under that category too.
Absolutely.
I mean, he did a lot of shepherding. And Eric Flint.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say the same thing. Eric's Ring of Fire stuff grew larger than he was, and is one of my favorite things to this day. And I would also say Robert Asprin with his Thieves World stuff.
Yes. And I'm sure you know that Bill's wife, Jody Lynn Nye, co-wrote with Asprin.
Yes. Actually, he and I talked about that.
Yeah, and then she was able to take over the series when he suddenly passed, unfortunately. So I thought that was great that the Myth series could still continue even after he was gone. So because that's one of the most fun series.
It was, and it was revolutionary at the time. And it got so much press or got so much readership. I think, was it George Martin that started Wild Cards right at the
Yes.
So it's just amazing to me. But Eric Flint, everybody I've ever met, no matter what their political thoughts were, and most of the people who are in the science fiction community in the area that I'm super interested in, really would not have the same political beliefs as Eric. But he was the most gracious guy, and he helped a lot of people become professional authors that probably would have never gotten a chance without Ring of Fire being there. Right.
Yeah. I heard that. I didn't realize it was such a big thing that I guess their bulletin board just was. He realized how much fanfic was being created, and he's like, "Okay, so we're going to do something with this now."
Yeah. So I love all of this inside baseball, but we really need to spend at least a few minutes talking about Bureau 42, which is a Four Horsemen anthology that's unlike any other Four Horsemen anthology that's come before. This isn't, we have a mission, we're going to go out and do it. This is This is the cold case files of the Peacemaker Guilds, and
it is
some of the most powerful writing that I think has been in any Four Horsemen anthology, with one story that you and I spoke about off air that I think is probably the best writing by this author ever, and also one of the most heart-wrenching short stories I've ever read, Broken Mantra.
Yes. Okay, so with COVID and everything several years ago, we were basically limited to interacting via chat and Zoom calls and things like that. And the folks around the first Peacemaker anthology set the terms. We had started to chat around that. So of course, when you're talking with friends and everything like that, things just kind of get going completely and totally bonkers. And this came up as an idea of, well, what if we did something with the, cold cases from the Peacemaker files, and what would we call it, and how would we do this? And so this has been a few years in the works. We had a few delays, but we finally got everything together. But of course, it had to be 42, because if you're a geek, you understand.
Absolutely. If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. And if you don't know, go read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
There you go.
And then you'll know.
And bring a towel.
Yes, and bring a towel. We've, any group of law enforcement or paramilitary, anytime you're investigating cases, you're always going to have those cases that don't get solved. So those end up in an archive of some sort. And that's what Bureau 42 is it's the archives of the Peacemaker's unsolved stories. And like you said, they're cold cases. And we have each author in the anthology has come up with a different way of approaching how a case might end up in the Bureau, how they might come about to learn about a case in the Bureau, and how they would go about solving those cases. So that's what this whole anthology is. And everybody that we invited to it. So the Peacemaker anthologies are a little bit different because we actually invite the different authors into the anthology as opposed to having any open spaces, just because unfortunately Kevin Ikenberry and I don't have the time to go through a slush pile.
Right.
So we want to make sure that we can do this as fast as possible.
Well, you also ended up with the all-stars of CKP as writers. Yes. And part of that was by design. A couple of folks haven't written in the 4HU before, but were willing to, jump in with both feet and have done a great job. But everybody else, most of the names, including, Nick might have a short story in one of the other anthologies, but I don't think he's done a full novel in the 4HU yet. Had Fred Hughes done anything in 4HU before?
No, he has not either. This is his first one.
Cool. And then you got Marissa Wolf, you got Kevin Stevenson, you got Casey Moores, John Osborne, who is an excellent writer. There's not a bad story in this anthology, and I would be surprised if there doesn't end up being 3 or 4 novels out of this anthology.
Yeah, and that was a little bit, I think a little bit by design from the author standpoint. Is some of them are like, oh, I really like this, and they made it so that they can jump off. Carolyn Kay is a new CKP author, and she had her first 4HU novel come out last year. And let's see who else. Matt Novotny, his story is basically a continuation of a little bit of a continuation from Prodigal Son and Gumbo, which is the short story in the first antho. Yep. And he brings back the Cajuns,
which is hilarious.
Yes.
I love that group.
Yeah, so he was trying to figure out how to get them back into the universe a little bit, and there's always talk in the background. Anytime all these guys get together, it's like, oh, well, how about if I do a novel with these sets of characters? So there's been noises for some of these stories.
John Osborne's story is hilarious, too.
Yes. I'm trying to remember. You got to excuse me. Oh, God, yes.
The bear?
Yes. John's is hysterical because he's got. I mean, I don't know where he came up with that, but it was brilliant.
It was, and it was unexpected.
Yeah. Charlie Cox. This is also her. I think she's got a short story in the Phoenix Initiative Antho.
Mm-hmm.
But we invited her in on this one, so she was really excited, and she did a really, really good story for this too.
Yes.
So everybody's worked really hard. Everybody's got really great stories, and hopefully, I think some of them will. I mean, some of the characters, like John Osborne, I'm pretty sure his characters are just going to exist in short stories.
Right.
But there are other ones that, absolutely could be have their own novels.
Yes, and it has been a long time since I've read any anthology, not just a CKP anthology, but any anthology where every single short story was a hit out of the park. And I think Bureau 42 is one of the best books, period, that CKP has put out. I think it's now my favorite book of the year so far.
Oh, well, thank you.
And all of that goes toward an anthology is a direct representation of the editors, because especially in anthologies that are like Four Horsemen anthologies, where there has to be continuity, and the stories are not just following a theme, but in many cases they're building off of stuff that's happened before. When you're dealing with, how many stories was in this anthology? 14? 12? 13 different individuals all writing into something that has 100 books behind it, and still keep the continuity going. That's amazing to me.
Yeah, it really is. Now, I will admit, I mean, there are some people that I know to ping. It's like, if I have a question because I can't remember 100%. I mean, there are other folks. John Osborne, because he's working on the RPG.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many questions of me. Hey, John, is it this or this? Is it that or the other? Is it? It was just really quick messages because I needed a quick answer, and of course he would get back to me. And so, I mean, it really does take a lot of folks to remember everything that's going on, and to remember everything that needs to make sense in something like this. Because you're right, you've got 13 or 14 authors, and we all have to make sure that we're all on the same page and make sure that everything makes sense.
So what's in the future for Mia Kleve? Is there anything that you've got coming up that you're working on for CKP that you can talk about? Or
well, like I said, I've been working on the series for Bill Fawcett and Kacey Moore's.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to. I've been watching Bill Frisbee's social media feed because he's been giving us updates on his Last Marines, the next installment of those.
Right.
We're looking forward to those. Other than that, unfortunately, I get projects as I've got openings and Chris has assignments. So, but I'm hoping to get a lot more, to get some more for CKP stuff for this year. And I don't know if I'm going to be doing another anthology or not. I'll probably take a little bit of a break because this last one was
a slog,
a lot of work. Yeah. Well, it was just like I said, there were some delays, and it was just a lot of work to get everything to come together. The authors did their part, but sometimes processes and pulling folks in and meeting their schedules, it doesn't always flow the way you want to, and it just happens that way sometimes.
So, are you active on social media if people want to know more about what's going on in Mia's life, or know more about the editing process or anything like that? Is there anything you can point them to?
Yeah, actually, I do have my editing is Marked Up Editing. It's MRK_DUP editing.
Uh-huh.
And my website for my editing page is mrkdup.com.
Okay.
And you can, so if you are an author and you're looking to have something, need to hire an editor, you can send me an email via my contact page there. But my personal page, unfortunately, is just mostly personal stuff. So if you want to see what I do, if you want to see what I do occasionally on the editing stuff, the marketing page is the best way to do it.
Okay. And I assume you're active on the CKP pages on Facebook also.
Yeah, I pop in there occasionally and make comments and tease the authors and give them grief.
That's a great hobby.
It is.
So, and then the question that I've tried to ask everybody this year on the podcast, recommend a book. It doesn't have to be in the science fiction genre, just something that you've read that, if you met somebody on the street and they said, I'm not a reader, I want to read something that's, recommend something to me. What would you recommend? Give us a good book. So right now I would absolutely recommend book 1 in the Repairman Jack series, which is The Tomb. Right.
I would recommend Bill Frisby's Last Marines.
I agree with that.
Let's see, what was the other one? I just had one just go. Jonathan Mayberry's Joe Ledger series.
I may have to look that one up. I don't think I know that one.
Yeah, and the first one of that series is Patient Zero.
Okay, cool.
And it's okay. So just a proviso on that.
Yep.
Yes, it's a zombie story, but you have to understand, I am not a fan of zombie stories. I do not watch The Walking Dead. I don't care about all that. I tore through Patient Zero.
Oh, cool.
Because Jonathan does such a good job of giving you something other than the zombies as the story.
Okay.
And then the other part is his zombies are scientific. They have a scientific basis.
Cool. Well, I look forward to that. I'll put that on my reading list. Maya, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really fun time. I hope we can do this again soon, because I think the listeners would love to hear more about the editing process and what goes on behind the scenes. And this has been a pleasure. It's better than I thought it would be. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
You've been listening to the CKP Future Books podcast with host Randall Willis. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving it a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you subscribe. Show likes and channel subscriptions are also much appreciated on the CKP YouTube channel. Finally, if you'd like to know more about this author or others on the CKP roster, visit chriskennedypublishing.com. Thanks for listening to the CKP Future Books podcast. We'll see you next time.